There were stories the wind carried in those days. Stories of a man, of a king. A king whose voice carried the weight of mountains. Whose gaze seemed to pierce the scriptures of heaven. And whose wisdom was like a river flowing from the heart of God himself. But this is not yet his story. This is hers. She was queen of the south, a woman of dark radiance and fierce command. Her kingdom lay upon the edge of flame-colored deserts and emerald mountains, rich with gold, incense, and ancient power. Known to her people as Makeda, she was the lioness crowned in sunlit silk, a queen robed in authority but restless in her spirit. For Makeda ruled not just with beauty but with brilliance. Her courts were bustling with learned men and women, astronomers who charted the stars, poets whose tongues could calm storms, merchants who brought word of far kingdoms. She was surrounded by voices, yet none spoke of the thing her soul hungered for. Truth. Wisdom. A certainty that transcended palaces and plunder. Then one night, beneath the jeweled darkness of the Ethiopian sky, the stories reached her. A king in Jerusalem, said a traveler from afar. A son of the mighty David, added a merchant, his eyes widening. His wisdom is said to be as boundless as the sea, whispered an old priest, and his God is the living one, whose name shakes the earth. Solomon. His name echoed in the queen's chamber long after the men had bowed and left. She could not ignore it. Was there truly such a man, one whose heart was shaped by a God unlike any other? Could a mortal be so filled with light? Makeda walked through her royal courtyard, her golden gown trailing behind her, cascadeless as a hush in the night. The pillars stood tall, draped in carved leopards and gilded vines, the fountain sang at her side. Even her splendor felt too small, too shallow, beside what she had heard of this king. For days she pondered. For nights she dreamed. The queen was not content with rumor or runway tales. She wanted to see for herself. She would go to him. She would seek him. She would test him with riddles born of her court and mind, questions that had silenced princes and humbled prophets. For she was Queen of Sheba, no man, no king, no god was beyond the reach of her questions. But something deeper pulled her. Not pride. Not conquest. A longing. A cry from the soul that cannot be silenced, a thirst for what is real, holy, and everlasting. And so she summoned her council. In the great hall, where torches cast halos of fire on stone, where the scent of incense wove itself like serpent smoke, she stood tall as a tree of cedar, and spoke. I have heard the tales of Solomon son of David, king of Jerusalem. I have heard of his God and his wisdom. I do not seek tribute nor alliance nor victory. I seek truth. I will take of my treasures and questions, and walk the sands to test this king myself. Her ministers bowed their heads, both in awe and in fear. For such a journey was no light matter, desert burned and bandits lurked, and Sheba itself was a jewel envied by many nations. But the queen's resolve was flame, and none could quench it. That night, as her handmaidens unwrapped strings of ivory and draped gold upon polished cedar chests, Makeda stood by her window again, peering into the wide horizon. Somewhere beyond, a man, a king, sat beneath the holy flame of God. A king who might have the answer her soul sought. If so, then the journey would be worth every grain of sand. If not, then the world would know, no wisdom on earth could outshine the throne of Sheba. And thus the story truly began. Her eyes like embers, her voice like wind. Build the caravan. At dawn, we moved toward Jerusalem. The dawn crept slowly over the hills of Sheba, a sculptor carving day from night. And with it came the thunder of preparation. The palace courtyard buzzed beneath a sky the color of pale apricot. Royal guards stood like living statues, their spears gleaming in the sunlight that kissed the earth awake. Sliding doors carved with lotus flowers opened slowly as chambers breathed out their treasures, the wealth of a kingdom that stood where trade winds kissed ancient gold. She moved through it all like a breathed command. Queen Makeda, her crowns were not made of gold alone, but of minds sharpened by counsel and eyes trained on the unseen. Yet this morning, even she felt the tremble of anticipation in her steps. For she was not preparing for war, nor for festival, but for a quest for wisdom. Her first order was delivered as the sun cast rays of amber upon her throne room. Bring the gold from Aksum. Load the camels with spices rare as starlight. The alabaster jars, fill them too, with incense, with oils that breathe over kings and conquerors. Let the journey remember that Sheba is a kingdom of glory. Men bowed and raced into motion. Caravans were built, cedar wood lashed with ivory. Camels, the silent walkers of sand oceans, were adorned with bell collars and draped cloth of crimson and cream. Royal scribes documented every loaded chest, every polished jewel, marking their queen's procession with shameless pride. Among the treasures was a stone, round, smooth, marked with the ancient crest of Sheba. A sign of covenant, a reminder of where she came from, and of the weight she now carried to the lands of Judea. But even the wealth was not her greatest preparation. It was the questions. In the quiet of the throne room, rich with the scent of frankincense, Makeda sat with her wisest advisors. Scrolls lay open, their ink whispering riddles older than the pyramids, stories that made kingdoms tremble. But she did not train for war, she trained for words. Let the questions come, she said. Not of riches or beasts or markets, but of life. Of wisdom. Of God. And they did. She pondered riddles. What is the thing that gives yet takes, that feeds yet consumes? What sits between life and death, yet is neither? She rehearsed questions of justice and suffering, of the secret bonds between heaven and earth. Her mind became a battlefield, where foolishness died and wonder was born. Her last rehearsal ended at night. The torches flickered as her counselors bowed and withdrew. Left alone, she let the silence wrap her like silk. She understood more now, that wisdom was not a crown to be worn, but a calling to be answered. That night she visited the royal stables. Her camel, pale like alabaster, eyes dark as midnight figs, was prepared. She laid her hand on its strong neck and whispered, "Carry me to truth." Her garments for the journey were chosen with care, a gold-embroidered mantle of flowing linen, her body wrapped in the scent of sandalwood and myrrh. Her hair swept and bound like the rising dunes, an image of regality, strength, and mystery. When she was dressed, adorned, and fully arrayed, her handmaidens watched in reverent awe. Yet Makeda's heart was not high. It was bowed, beneath expectation, and hope. Before sleep, she walked the palace one last time. She trailed her hand over carved columns from forests of far lands, stepped lightly across mosaic floors depicting stars and rivers. Each step carried whispers, the story of her people, the fire of their ancestors. And she prayed. Not to the gods of gold or stone, but to the God of the unknown. The God who, perhaps, had breathed wisdom into the son of David. She prayed for strength. For journey. For truth. Then she slept beneath a tapestry of sky and was carried by dreams to a land she had not seen, yet a place her spirit already longed for. A land called Jerusalem. Before the sun rose again, the earth trembled with the sound of countless feet and hooves. The desert wind curled around the banners of Sheba. The caravan stood ready like an army of wealth and wonder. Makeda mounted her camel. Her people bowed low, to the woman who would leave not for battle, but for revelation. I go, she declared, voice breaking like dawn, to seek the highest wisdom, and to return not only with treasures of earth, but treasures of the soul. Then with a single command, she turned her gaze toward the horizon, and the Queen of Sheba began her pilgrimage. The sun rose upon the caravan like a blessing. It cast warm rivers of light across the dunes, turning every grain of sand into gold. Camels swayed with noble rhythm, their burdened steps marking the pulse of a queen's resolve. The great caravan of Sheba had begun its journey, a symphony of wealth, wonder, and whispers. At its head rode Makeda. Her posture was a poetic balance between grace and might. Clad in a flowing garment of gold-threaded linen, she sat tall upon her camel, her face lifted slightly, eyes searching the horizon. There was something deeper in her gaze than destiny or duty. It was hunger. Hunger for truth. For meaning. For answers not carved in stone but in spirit. The air was sweet with hibiscus and myrrh. Every chest strapped to every camel was filled, jars of honeyed dates, tusks of ivory, fabrics dyed in royal indigo and blood-red scarlet. Yet even these earthly riches paled beside the treasure in the queen's heart. Stories of a king, Solomon, son of David, had shaped her course. And now the desert itself listened as Sheba walked toward Jerusalem. Hundreds of servants marched in harmony with the queen's court. Drummers tapped slow rhythms on goatskin, keeping pace with the beat of the sand. Warriors flanked the caravan like two wings of a powerful bird, their shields catching the light, their eyes sweeping each shifting dune. This was not a journey born of anxiety, but of burning curiosity. And not once did Makeda look back. As the hours melted like wax, the desert took on its own character, a canvas of endless expanse. Waves of sand rose and fell like the breath of some ancient creature. Distant hills shimmered under the heat, their outlines blurring into mirage and dust. Yet all was not silent. The wind had a voice. It carried memories. It brushed against the queen's veil and whispered, "All things hidden, all truth, seek, and it shall be found." Makeda closed her eyes and inhaled deeply. She felt that the universe itself was speaking. That this journey, dangerous as it might seem, had been etched on her heart before she was born. She turned slightly, speaking to her chief advisor who rode beside her. "The desert is a place of stripping," she said softly. "It takes away the noise, the comfort, the illusion. What remains is only what's true." He nodded, adjusting his cloak against the rising wind. "Then may your questions be answered by He who lives beyond all thrones." The first night in the desert was like a jewel cast in velvet. Tents were raised, torches lit, and weary servants placed water bowls at the feet of kneeling camels. But Makeda did not retire to her tent. Instead, she walked barefoot on the cool sand, letting the earth greet her skin. She looked up. The sky, an ocean of stars, seemed to pulse with life. Stars in patterns she knew, constellations she had studied. Yet here, beneath this dome of fire and silence, the lights became more than figures and fables. They became sermons, promises of something beyond terrestrial logic. As she gazed, her heart formed a question. Who are you, that the heavens obey your command and kings crave your wisdom? There was no answer in words, but in wind, in wonder, in the echo of eternity. She slept soundly that night. On the second day, the sand stiffened with stone, and small green shrubs dotted the way. The landscape changed as if to remind her, growth happens even in dryness. And the queen noted this, humbled by the desert's lessons. Her servants sang ancient songs as they walked, songs of harvest and hope. Their feet left trails in the sand, trails soon erased by the same wind that carried their music. And behind them, far in the rising light, footprints vanished, but faith remained. Makeda's heart did not waver. Her mind played and replayed the stories of Solomon, the child of promise, heir to David, builder of the holy temple. A man said to have asked God not for riches or victory, but for understanding. That kind of wisdom, that kind of ambition, demanded respect. She pulled from her pouch a papyrus scroll, torn and yellowed by age. In it she had written her first question for the king. She read it again. What is the thread that holds both grief and joy together, and yet is neither broken nor severed by time? She thought she knew the answer. But she wanted to hear what the king would say. She wanted to see the light in his eyes as he spoke truth touched by God. And more than that, more than anything, she wanted to know if the rumors of the God of Israel were true. By the third day, the horizon turned to stone, mountains in the distance like bruises on the earth. The caravan paused beneath an acacia grove, drinking water that sparkled like liquid glass. Makeda dismounted to rest. She watched her people, strong, loyal, faithful, and blessed them in her heart. For in this journey, she knew, she was not alone. A child approached her shyly, a servant's daughter with eyes wide as the open sky. "My lady," the child asked, "why do you travel so far?" Makeda knelt. Laid a gentle hand on the girl's hair. "Because even queens seek what's true. And truth often asks us to walk beyond our own land." The girl smiled, her spirit lifted. In that tender exchange, the queen confirmed yet again, this journey was not for her alone. It was a bridge between kingdoms. Between souls, between earth and the living God. The caravan rose again. The desert watched. The world held its breath. She was coming. The desert stretched on like a vast parchment of God's own making. Not empty. Not desolate. But sacred. Each dune rose like a question, each breeze whispered an answer half understood. The Queen of Sheba felt it, she was walking not through the land, but through the very chambers of her soul. By now, the caravan had left behind the fertile southern borderlands and was deep into a region of haunting beauty. The sand was pale as bone, dotted by jagged rocks that seemed remnants of an ancient broken crown. The sun was merciless during the day, but after sunset the sky shimmered like shattered obsidian laced with diamond stars. The queen's mind, like the sky, was lit with 1,000 thoughts. She carried with her nearly a dozen riddles and twice as many inquiries. Some for Solomon. Some for God. Others for herself. But the deeper she ventured into the wilderness, the clearer it became. The desert itself was a teacher. One morning, Makeda ordered the caravan to halt. Ahead, the ground dipped into a plain of stillness and strange beauty. The horizon wavered, the sun's glare forming a silver lake that vanished when approached. Her riders looked at her, confused, but she dismounted. She removed her sandals. And stood barefoot on the earth. Some of her servants hurried to her side, begging her to reconsider. The ground was harsh, the journey perilous. But Makeda stepped forward and said, "There are answers we cannot hear except in silence. The desert is not my enemy. It is my mirror." She closed her eyes, and began to walk. Each step was a sacrifice. Each grain of sand burned against her feet, humbling her majesty, stripping her rank, returning her, not to the crown, but to the clay she was born from. She walked until her breath slowed. Long enough for the noise within to quiet. For the ache of her body to become one with the ache of her questions. In the stillness, a wind brushed her face. Gentle. Declaring nothing. Carrying everything. And there, with no king, no palace, no throne, Queen Makeda began to pray. Not to idols sculpted by hand. Not to gods of convenience or tradition. But to the God she had only heard rumors of. God of Israel, if you be true, Show me your light in the wilderness. If you gave that man Solomon wisdom, then give me humility to receive it. Not as queen, but as a child of dust. Her knees lowered to the sand. Tears, unbidden as morning dew, gathered in the corners of her eyes. Tears not of despair, but awakening. She tasted the salt of surrender. The desert did not reply. Yet the silence felt like an embrace. Sheba's queen had become Sheba's seeker. She rose, heart freer, face lifted. Her attendants watched her return with awe. They saw not a queen broken, but a queen unburdened, inwardly clothed with something stronger than gold. Trust. The caravan resumed. But now every riddle felt lighter. Every question felt kinder. Every step felt like part of a story larger than desert, or throne, or kingdom. That night the stars bloomed, constellations so bright it was as if heaven opened a window. The queen sat beside the fire, hair unveiled, the glow outlining her profile like a candle to an icon. Her chief advisor spoke quietly. You have found something. She nodded. Or perhaps something has found me. He lowered his head, reverence in every gesture. Your questions, will you still ask them? She smiled softly, flame and starburst in her eyes. Yes. But I am no longer asking to test a king. I am asking to find a God. That night the desert wind carried her prayer to distant Jerusalem, where a king, perhaps unknowingly, began to feel the stir in his spirit. A visitor was coming. Not with war, but with wonders. Not for Solomon, but for the Lord who made him. The desert wind carried whispers of destiny as the Queen of Sheba's majestic caravan neared the gates of Jerusalem. Sand, sun, and silence had been her companions for countless days, but now, before her, rose a city unlike any other. A city of gold. A realm of promise. The home of a king whose name had traveled farther than the map of her own realm. Her chariot slowed as the sun leaned low, blessing every stone of Jerusalem with its molten glow. The city shimmered, its walls kissed by gold and guarded by pride. Trumpets sang from the watchtower. The people paused, breath arrested. News raced faster than footsteps. The Queen of Sheba has arrived. She stepped out. First, her gaze absorbed the towering cedars that framed the palace gates. Then the carved lions that watched in regal silence. And finally, the palace itself, slow exhale, heart at ease yet ignited with awe. Her soul recognized this place before the dust had settled beneath her sandals. A woman of wealth, wisdom, and grace, yet she knew this moment was not about grandeur. It was about truth. About the divine longing in her chest being answered. The Queen of Sheba adjusted her golden crown. Each jewel glittered with stories yet untold, amber from her rivers, pearls from her coast, rubies once laid on the breast of her mother, her grandmother, her lineage. She was not merely a sovereign. She was a seeker. The gates opened. There, beneath a great arch adorned with gold and white sculptures, stood Solomon, the King of Peace. The man whose wisdom, it was said, came not from royal blood alone, but from the breath of God himself. His posture was not of a warrior or an idol, but of a man who had stood long in the presence of light and welcomed it. His eyes locked with hers, the desert and the palace, two worlds in an instant of silent greeting. He stepped forward. No bow. No forced gesture. Instead, a deep stillness, as though both understood, this encounter was written into the earth long before either of them took their first breath. Welcome, King Solomon said, his voice smooth as flowing oil, yet strong enough to calm the tempest in her heart. Blessed be the one who brings their questions in pursuit of truth. The Queen of Sheba smiled softly. A smile that belonged not to just a woman, but to a leader who knew the weight of nations, the press of prophecy, and the ache of unanswered wonder. "I come with riddles," she said. "For I have heard your wisdom is not merely spoken, it is lived." Solomon nodded, and as he did, it was as though the palace itself bowed with him. "Then may your riddles serve as rivers, and the truth, living water." She was ushered into the palace. Columns of marble stretched like pillars of cloud reaching toward heaven. Lanterns shaped like stars gleamed in every corner. Gleaming bowls of incense filled the air with a fragrance northern winds had never carried. Artisans painted the walls with gardens, rivers, and sacred beasts, visions of Eden blossoming through every arch. The queen's eyes took in the splendor. Yet her spirit searched not for treasure, but for light. Women of the harem bowed gently. Chiefs of Solomon's court placed hands upon their chests. Children who had been peeping raced to the courtyards, speaking in hushed reverence. Her arrival was not spectacle. It was significance. She was led to the great throne hall. And there, seated upon a throne carved with lions and crowned with cherubim, was Solomon, this time not as a greeter, but as a king. Sheba stood a moment, letting the sight imprint on her mind forever. "Beautiful," she whispered. "Not at stone, nor gold, nor wealth, but at the wisdom woven into the very architecture." This palace, she could feel, was not built for show. It was built on faith. And so, the Queen of Sheba bowed her head, not to a man alone, but to the God whose breath filled this place. Her journey had not been in vain. She looked up. "I am ready," she said. And the questions her heart carried like living embers, were now ready to burn into bright, endless light. In the heart of a palace carved by wisdom and raised by faith, the Queen of Sheba finally stood face to face with the man whose name had rippled across seas and sands, King Solomon. She had stepped through cities bowed in her honor. She had walked among kings who traded silver for her smiles. But none of them had caused her spirit to tremble in quiet astonishment the way Solomon did. He sat upon a magnificent throne, adorned with lions sculpted in gold, wings spread, heads raised, as though guarding both the crown and the promise behind it. Yet there was no strain of ego in the man. No glitter that outshone the truth in his eyes. He carried his royalty with the ease of a shepherd, a king who knew his authority flowed not from bronze shield nor sapphire ring, but from the breath of the Almighty. Their eyes met, and the room fell into reverent hush. The queen, her crown perfectly framed by the polished pillars behind her, stood in stillness. Assured, powerful, yet sensing the gravity of the moment. This was the encounter her journey had bled for. This was the moment her spirit had burned toward. Solomon gestured, graciously, with eyes that pierced and welcomed all at once. "Queen of Sheba," he said. His voice was like water flowing from a high place, smooth, yet unable to be stopped. "Your arrival is a blessing to Jerusalem. The Lord, who made the heavens, honors those who seek truth, not for pride, but for wisdom." The queen inclined her head, her veil catching the soft rays of light that filtered through a vast arch. "I have heard of your God," she began slowly, each word wrapped in the dignity of ages, "and of the understanding he has placed upon your heart. So I've come, not to flatter, but to test. Not for treasure, but for truth." Solomon nodded. "Then let your questions rise, and may the one who sees all things be our witness." The guard stepped back. The air shifted. The Queen of Sheba took one slow step forward, her spirit anchored in both curiosity and reverence. Her voice, soft as sand yet sharp as flint, traveled across the hall. "I will speak a riddle," she said, raising her chin. "And I shall know by your answer, if what I have heard is merely mortal tales, or divine truth." The court leaned in silently. Solomon sat forward, one hand resting on the head of the sculpted lion perched beside him. She spoke. "What is that which is mighty in many but dies in one?" Which touches without hands, and breathes without lungs. The court froze. Solomon closed his eyes. The queen waited. Within seconds, his lips moved, and his eyes opened, not in triumph, but in peace. It is sound, he said. A legion of voices becomes echo. Yet in one mind, unheard, it becomes silence. The queen exhaled. It was not the accuracy of the answer that stirred her. It was the swiftness, the gentleness of a mind that walked with heaven as easily as one walks a garden. Her wisdom met his, and found him more than equal. She was not here to be conquered. She was here to witness. Then another, she said, allowing a hint of challenge to lift in her tone. For wisdom is not measured in one moment, but a lifetime. He nodded with respect, leaning ever so slightly forward, fully attentive. What is the womb of truth, born without mother or father? Living in all ages, yet dying by falsehood? The silence lengthened this time. Courtiers glanced nervously. Some bowed heads in prayer. Solomon's gaze lifted toward the ceiling, as if he could see beyond the gold, beyond the dome, into the heavens themselves. Then softly, he answered. Virtue. The queen's eyelids fluttered. There it was. The harmony between human brilliance and divine flame. Her lips pressed into a restrained smile. She had not just heard truth, she had seen it. In that silent exchange, riddle and reply, a deeper language was spoken. A language that has no alphabet. A language of spirit meeting spirit. The Queen of Sheba, a woman of unrivaled splendor, bowed her head, not in defeat, but in deep acknowledgement. For truly, she said quietly, God has set his breath upon you. Solomon rose. And the hall, filled with lantern light, rich tapestries, and stirred hearts, seemed to breathe with them. Come, he said. Let us walk the palace, and speak not as rivals, but as seekers of the same great light. The palace hall hummed with silent wonder as the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon began to walk its length together. Gold leaf on ancient cedar beams caught the light of 100 flame-lit lanterns. Murals told stories of prophets, patriarchs, and pillars of fire in the night. Everywhere the queen looked, heaven seemed to kiss the earth. The queen's steps were measured, not in hesitation, but in rhythm with something deeper than time, destiny. Her eyes, full of both curiosity and reverence, searched not merely for answers, but for revelation. She turned to Solomon, her voice smooth as the Benishangul silk she wore. I have come far not only to challenge, she said, but to understand the soul of your kingdom, the wisdom that runs through its veins. I have brought riddles, as weapons against pride and vanity. But what I've found so far answers not with arrogance, but ease. Solomon nodded, a gentle smile gifting warmth to the space between them. Wisdom, he replied, is not the end of pride, but its death. And a king is no king at all, if his throne is not anchored in truth. The words echoed within her. The queen paused beside a fountain carved from onyx and marble, water danced over each stone, catching flickers of gold from the lantern lights. She bent her head slightly, as if listening to the water's song. Then she spoke again, her tone lowering, eyes locked with his. Let us continue then. If your wisdom is from heaven, it will withstand not only the test of intellect, but the test of mystery. Solomon's expression grew grave, not out of fear, but the awareness that the true search for wisdom is not for the faint-hearted. Then let the next riddle rise, he said. The queen lifted her chin and spoke. Who is she that speaks without a tongue? Wounds without a sword? And binds the strong without a chain? The question fell heavy and spiritual. Some in the court shivered. A child near the column leaned into her mother's shawl. Solomon did not move. Then, lifting his gaze slightly upward, he answered. A lie. The queen's eyes widened. Yes. A lie, voice without lips, wound that pierces the soul, chain invisible yet harder to break than iron. She watched him, not as an opponent watching a rival, but as a scholar beholding a teacher. She nodded slowly. Then Solomon did something no king had ever done before. Gently, without pomp, he offered her a question in return. "May I ask one now?" he said. The queen folded her hands, intrigued. "The honor would be mine." Solomon looked at her, not as a queen, but as a mirror of the human soul. What is more ancient than time? More silent than death? And stronger than truth? The queen did not answer at once. Instead, she walked a few paces forward, letting her fingers glide softly across the cool stone wall. Her heart, once armored in certainty, softened now before something greater. Her journey was pushing her inward, brushing against the curtains of eternity. She turned. "It is love," she whispered, her voice catching the breath of the room. A pause. Then, a single nod from Solomon. The court fell silent. Two rulers, two seekers, and one truth shared between them, richer than gold and deeper than the foundations of the earth. The Queen of Sheba looked at Solomon then, not as rumor, not as myth, but as a man who, through God, had become a river of wisdom for nations to drink from. She saw in him not perfection, but surrender. And that, she knew, was the secret of all true greatness. She bowed her head. "This," she said slowly, voice trembling ever so slightly, "has never been about riddles, has it?" Solomon's voice softened. "No," he said. "It has always been about revelation." Night fell upon Jerusalem, but the palace of Solomon shone as if the heavens had touched earth with molten gold. Torches and lanterns glimmered like captured stars, and the fragrance of spices danced in the air, myrrh, saffron, cinnamon, and oil of gladness. The Queen of Sheba had been led into the hall of the banquet, a vast chamber carved in cedar and adorned with linen banners depicting vineyards, shepherds, and the Ark of the Covenant. Every seat was draped in fine tapestry, every cup filled with wine as rich as pomegranate juice. The air itself seemed to sing. She took her place beside King Solomon. A seat reserved not just for a guest, but an equal. And so began the golden banquet, not merely a feast of food, but of culture, honor, and glory. Musicians, dressed in linen and gold hems, played harps and timbrels. Melodies like rivers flowing from Eden filled the air, mingling with the soft murmur of wise minds. Poets recited lines of ancient mystery. Dancers moved like desert winds beneath a starlit sky. The queen, a woman seasoned by power and pilgrimage, was not easily astonished, but here, in this hall, her spirit lifted into new awe. This was not opulence for vanity's sake. It was worship. A living celebration of the God who delights in beauty and breathes splendor into every corner of his creation. Solomon watched her quietly. Not with the eyes of a king boasting, but of a host humbled by grace. "Your kingdom," she said softly, turning to him, "is overflowing with joy. Your servants minister like men who eat wisdom and drink peace." Solomon smiled. "Joy," he replied, "is the fragrance of righteousness. And peace, the harvest of truth." Their words fell into the flow of harps and the glow of candle flames. Then came the feast. Golden platters gleamed with roasted lamb, figs dripping with syrup, dates stuffed with almonds, wheat bread baked and perfumed with olive oil. Bowls of honey and butter were passed as servants moved like waves through the sea of guests. The Queen of Sheba dined, but her attention was not consumed by flavors or textures. She saw more. How every dish spoke of abundance. How every detail testified, not merely to wealth, but to a God who delights in both wonder and order. At the heart of the feast, Solomon lifted his cup. The hall went silent. "To wisdom," he said, "for it is more precious than rubies. To honor, for it crowns the humble. And to the Queen of Sheba, who has not come to flatter a man, but to seek the heart of God." The room erupted in soft applause, a reverent honor, not for vanity, but victory. The queen felt her breath catch ever so briefly, not in surprise, but recognition. Yes, this is why she came. Not for stories. Not for spectacle. But to see God's glory reflected in a man, in a nation, in a people. She touched her chest gently, the weight of her own journey settling into one truth. God's presence is not bound by borders. The banquet was more than food, it was communion. A communion of cultures, kingdoms, minds, and spirits. A feast where two thrones bowed beneath one highest throne, and under the lights of 1,000 lanterns, the Queen of Sheba quietly let the wisdom of Jerusalem feed her soul. For in Solomon's house, she tasted not just bread, but revelation. The golden banquet ended, but the glow of its message lingered long after the last servant bowed away and the final candle flickered in reverence. Solomon's palace did not rest, nor did its meaning. For in the silent hours of dawn, the Queen of Sheba found herself walking its corridors alone, her heart burning with a new understanding. She had seen many kingdoms. She had strode through palaces of granite and trod on marble floors polished by 1,000 hands. But none had struck her so deeply. Not because they lacked gold, but because they lacked God. That morning, with her royal garments folded gracefully across her frame, the queen asked to speak to Solomon, not as a rival, not as a scholar, but as a witness. He received her in the chamber of pillars, a breathtaking hall lined with 12 towering columns of white cedar, each carved with vines and wedding lilies. The morning sun, pouring in through the high windows, traced halos on the floor like heavenly brushstrokes. Solomon approached with quiet dignity, his eyes already touched by the early radiance. The queen turned to him, the weight of truth now evident in her voice, strong, yet softened by sincerity. What I heard in my land, she began, was but a shadow of what I have seen. The half was not told me. Her tone carried no flattery. In her gaze lay pure revelation. Your wisdom, O king, is not your own. Nor is the splendor of your house. Your people are blessed not because they serve a king, but because they serve a God who makes that king wise. Solomon bowed his head. She continued. Blessed be the Lord your God, she declared, each word ascending like incense, who delighted in you, setting you on the throne of Israel. Because he loved Israel forever, he made you king, to do justice and righteousness. The words filled the hall. A chorus of meaning. A coronation of truth. She was not praising a man, but the God who crowned him with wisdom. Solomon raised his eyes, humbled by her words. There was no boast in him. Only a king who had learned early that favor was a river flowing from the heavens, not the throne. The queen raised her right hand, signaling her servants to bring forward her gifts. And what gifts they were! 120 talents of gold. Rare and sacred spices, more than had ever entered Israel before. Precious stones, polished to mirror the stars. Ivory art, rolled in linen as soft as fulfillment. And animals rare and pure, gifted as living tribute. The courtiers held their breath as the mesh of cultures met in sacred exchange. But what happened next hushed the hall to pure wonder. Solomon, master of kings and steward of divine wisdom, did not merely accept. He reciprocated. He gave her all she desired. And more. He offered her treasures she had not even known to ask for. Robes, woven by temple artisans, vessels made of beaten gold, incense from the holy place, scrolls of psalms written by his own father, David. Not to outdo her, but to honor her. For honor is the true mark of a king. And in the quiet of that exchange, the Queen of Sheba's faith transformed. No longer was she simply a queen of a powerful land. She was a woman who had seen the face of truth, not in marble or ruby, but in the fear of the Lord that dwelt in a man. She stepped back gently. Her eyes filled not with tears, but with glory. Your God lives, she whispered, almost to herself. And I will not return to my land as I came. The royal hall quieted, the echo of music gently fading into a stillness that felt almost holy. The Queen of Sheba, robed in cascading gold, sat with eyes fixed upon King Solomon, not with suspicion now, but with an awakening awe. Her earlier riddles and challenges were not meant to provoke, but to discern. To test whether all she had heard was truth, or just well-spun legend. She needed to know if he was merely a man of intellect, or a ruler with understanding rooted in heaven itself. King of Israel, the queen spoke softly, hands folded over her lap. Everything I witnessed, your servants, your storehouses, your counsel, reflect order, purity, majesty. But wisdom, is it merely knowledge? Or something else? Solomon leaned forward slightly, his eyes calm, voice gentle. My queen, knowledge fills the mind. But wisdom is the quiet river that fills the soul. It is a gift from the Lord. A deep breath escaped her. She understood now. Wisdom wasn't about the brilliance of answers, it was about the posture of the heart receiving them. The queen's voice trembled, just slightly. Blessed be your God, who has delighted in you to set you on the throne of Israel. Because the Lord loved Israel forever, he made you king, to do justice and righteousness. The words came not as flattery, but as revelation. In that moment, Solomon looked at her differently. Not merely as an ally, nor another monarch, but as a seeker of truth. A woman who carried questions from the ends of the earth, not to gain advantage, but to receive what she did not possess, spirit-led wisdom. The great courtyard of Solomon's palace shimmered under the soft glow of the late afternoon sun, transforming marble floors and golden pillars into rivers of light. A reverent hush settled upon all present. Today, something ancient and sacred was taking place, the exchange of honor between two sovereigns. The Queen of Sheba rose from her seat, her posture upright, her spirit overflowing with reverence. She nodded slightly toward her servants, and they stepped forward from the shadows, each bearing gifts that could only be described as offerings of the earth's finest bounty. First came the spices. Towering jars of frankincense and myrrh, cassia and cinnamon, saffron and rare herbs that danced in the air, perfuming the quiet courtyard with a fragrance that felt like worship. Then came the gold, bars upon bars of shimmering wealth, heavier than privilege and brighter than flame. Historians would eventually recount that it was more than 120 talents of gold, the largest single recorded offering of its kind in Hebrew scriptures. Precious stones followed. Not just jewels, but gems carved from mountains and deserts, each one polished by the queen's own artisans. Emeralds, sapphires, onyx, and rubies, colors so brilliant, they seemed to hold captive the light itself. With each gift presented, the Queen of Sheba was not merely displaying her wealth, she was offering her respect. She spoke, voice clear and melodic. Great King, your wisdom is not just for Israel. It is a river flowing toward the nations. And to drink of it is to be filled. Solomon smiled humbly, rising from his throne. He offered more than gratitude, he reciprocated in kind. His gifts were not for display, but for honor. He presented all she desired, items of rare wood and priceless vessels, garments of glowing linen, prophetic scrolls, and sacred knowledge, treasures that could never be weighed on earthly scales. And then, a moment of unscripted quiet passed between them. The queen, touched in her depths, understood now that this journey had not merely enriched her kingdom, it had transformed her soul. And Solomon, too, felt the gravity. A queen from afar had brought spices, gold, and jewels, but more than this, she had brought earnest questions and a willing heart. Two sovereigns. Two kingdoms. One God over all. The journey that once began with questioning now turned toward completion, and transformation. As the early morning sun rose over Jerusalem, casting soft light like prayer across the palace stone, the Queen of Sheba stood near her caravan, no longer with the eager fire of a curious traveler, but with a fullness she never knew she lacked. The once proud queen now carried something greater than riches, knowledge, or status. She carried truth. Her attendants loaded the final woven baskets and chests onto the camels, not empty, but filled with the bounty of an exchange far richer than gold. There were scrolls written with sacred proverbs, blue-patterned fabrics of Hebrew design, and jewels gifted by Solomon. And yet, what mattered most was not visible to the eye. Solomon approached her caravan, wearing the robe of humble authority. The queen turned to face him, her eyes glistening not with sorrow, but with reverence. "I came with questions," she said softly. "But I return with answers my heart did not even know how to seek." Solomon nodded, the slightest smile gracing his lips. "Your journey has not been in vain. For where wisdom is sought in humility, there heaven plants blessing." Her steps toward her royal carriage were slow, sacred. She paused, lifting her gaze toward the temple upon Mount Moriah, breathing in deeply, as if trying to remember the scent of holy things forever. At the moment she stepped inside the covered litter, her spirit was not leaving empty as it came, it was departing full. Full of knowledge. Full of reverence. Full of the one true God. As the royal procession began its move across the dusty road, a soft wind rose, carrying with it the sound of distant psalms being sung in the temple. Behind her, Jerusalem stood radiant under the morning sky, not just a city of stone and jewels, but the place where her soul had been awakened. Time, like sand through royal fingers, finds its way into every story. But some stories are not buried by its passing, they become pillars in the halls of eternity. The journey of the Queen of Sheba did not end when her caravan disappeared into the horizon. Her journey rippled. Her kingdom, upon her return, was not the same, because she was not the same. She poured wisdom like oil upon her palace, establishing counsel not by law alone but by righteousness. The Proverbs of Solomon, now written in her private chambers, became the ancient pulsing heart of her throne. Wisdom is the principal thing, she would recite, and her royal attendants would bow their heads, for even they felt the presence of something greater than gold. But her legacy did not remain locked behind palace walls. Years passed, and her story grew beyond her kingdom, whispered in caravans across deserts, sung in the tents of wandering tribes, taught in the courts of rulers intrigued by her wealth of both spirit and treasure. It traveled across the sea. It was carried by the faithful, the dreamers, the poets, spun into the scrolls of historians, etched in tablets of truth. Centuries later, in a small village in Galilee, a voice would speak, not of riddles or gold, but of hearts willing to seek wisdom at all costs. A man named Jesus, walking dusty roads, teaching fishermen and shepherds, would remind his listeners of the legacy of a queen. The Queen of the South, he said, Matthew 12 verse 42, will rise up in judgment, for she came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and behold, one greater than Solomon is here. Her faith, her hunger for truth, had transcended generations. Her story was no longer just a political encounter. It had become sacred testimony. She had sought, and she had found. And in finding, she left a mark no time could erase. The desert winds have long shifted. The sands of kingdoms have risen and fallen. But the echo of a queen who dared to seek wisdom with her whole heart, still lingers like a quiet anointing over the pages of time. The Queen of Sheba was more than a figure robed in gold. She was a questioner of eternity, she was the embodiment of what it means to travel beyond comfort, to voyage through lands unknown, to leave one's throne for something greater than power, truth. She did not settle for hearsay. She did not lean on shallow traditions. She tested the wisdom of kings and found the breath of God instead. Her footsteps in history remind us that wealth cannot satisfy the soul. That curiosity can lead to divine encounter. That even a queen must bow before true wisdom. Her caravan may have long disappeared into the horizon. But her legacy stands upright, proclaiming to every generation. Seek, and you will find. Ask, and it will be given. Knock, and the door will be opened. Her story is not meant to be read. It is meant to be felt. Retold. Lived. In every woman who rises. In every soul who yearns for what is beyond the surface. In every dreamer unafraid to make the journey. Thank you for journeying through time with us, into the life, the honor, the transformation of the Queen of Sheba. Her story is a torch, a reminder that wisdom is worth the journey, and truth is worth the cost. If this story moved you, inspired you, or stirred something deeper, don't leave just yet. Subscribe to this channel for more stories of women in the Bible who changed history, not by might, but by faith. Hit the like button. Turn on notifications. And let me know in the comments, which other biblical queen or woman should we explore next? Together, let's rediscover the voices history tried to silence, and let them speak again. Until next time, stay rooted in truth, and keep shining like royalty.